The hero stood in the middle of some strange place that resembled a desert. The young man looked at everything that was happening in horror, not understanding where he was, and most importantly, how he got there. Some strange creature said that the guy had come, adding that this was the only god among all people. Strange entities told some to fall asleep, and for others they prophesied death, which was bound to happen, which left the young man in shock. Suddenly, a huge monster headed towards the unfortunate man, who, looking at it with wide eyes, asked not to do this. Continuing to scream, Chise jumped up on the bed, rubbing his head. He was glad that it was just a bad dream. Coming out into the living room, our hero decided that it was about 6 in the morning, and that was why he really wanted to sleep, although at the same time he wanted to eat something. At the same time, in other apartments, individual residents could be heard talking about the need to skip breakfast or the need to hurry to work. The events took place in the city of Hongu, where reconstruction began after a solar storm that occurred 18 years ago. And now this city has become a center for the development of science and technology. That same day, dressed in an ice cream costume, the young man actively approached the girl, who angrily told them to leave her alone. Taking off his hat, the boy complained that he was very hot, and therefore the young man did not hope that either he or anyone else would be able to sell anything in such a suit. Moreover, Chisu didn't like the fact that passersby looked at him with some kind of disdain. Many wanted to take a photo of him to show to their friends. The young man asked himself questions about why he chose this particular job, and just when our hero thought the kids were enjoying what he was doing, he heard a child tell his mom how it felt to be dressed in a poop costume, even though it was actually an ice cream cone. The boy grumbled and remarked that he would never buy anything that such an ugly person was selling, hinting at Chise. At that moment, the guy noticed his boss, who made comments to the employee about how he was talking to customers, and asked the young man to go to his office. After giving our hero a few days' salary, the man calmly told him not to come out again, although Chise couldn't understand why he was being fired. The boss said he bought this wonderful suit to attract customers, but it turned out that they, on the contrary, began to avoid this place. Even though the guy didn't believe until the very end that he was being fired, it was done, and the manager said out loud that the young people were being disrespectful. As he moved through the city, our hero was sure that it was all for the best, because he was tired of wearing the egg roll, the roll that was ruining his body. The young man was glad that he could now concentrate on today's match. Kisu lived in the old district, but he didn't care at all. Sitting at the computer, the young man was busy with something of his own. While playing computer games, the young man read a message that someone wanted to know where he was hiding. But after just a few minutes, the young man was happy that he had managed to reach the top in a month. He had become a winner, although it had not been easy. Although Chise was a little upset by his competitor, who stated that they would see each other next week during the next tournament. At this time, in an unknown place, a gamer sat, thinking about the fact that our hero thought too highly of himself, believing that he was the best at games. The opponent knew his opponent's name, but at the same time our hero thought that he was a rather strange person. Continuing to sit in front of the computer, the guy said out loud that they would eventually get together with this player anyway. Realizing that it was already late, our hero went to bed. But instead of a peaceful sleep, he dreamed of a party attended by many girls. But the young man didn't finish his dream because he received some kind of package, although Chise didn't understand why they were doing this at 4 o'clock in the morning. When the guy was called by name, he was surprised at first, but then he caught himself thinking that the messenger should know such things. When the young man opened the box, he was very surprised, because inside was an ordinary wooden box. At first, our hero thought that he had received a prize for winning the tournament, but then he decided that this could not have happened so quickly. However, after a moment, the young man decided that they had brought him the most powerful blade. Brandishing the knife, the teenager felt more powerful and more important than ever. But the very next moment, our hero was annoyed and angered by something, and he decided that he would file a complaint about something like this, since he was not a 3-year-old child to accept such a thing. At this time, the unknown man heard him being informed that the blade had been delivered, and therefore the messenger was returning back. Suddenly, the guy heard a message coming to him and decided that people were waking up that quickly. Taking his phone, Kisi decided that the guy he was supposed to sort things out with was writing to him. And just a moment later, some unknown caller declared that he was still looking after the young man and added that he was the only one who had strict working conditions. And then he continued to talk about how he had an application for a job in South Baishi, and therefore, if the young man was ready for this, then they could resolve this issue. The guy said that he would be there soon, especially since he was already standing at the station, and he thought to himself that this island is known for its capital for future technologies, with most of the companies being advanced technology companies. Sitting on the train, Chisi read a message that his parcel could not be delivered at the moment, but it would be possible a little later. At this time, the train was passing underwater, and therefore the passengers were delighted to see such beauty. The young man thought to himself that the message he had read was of no importance, although Chise immediately noticed the beauty. who noted that everything they had said about this place was not a lie. A moment later, the beauty looked at the child who was admiring the ocean floor. Although she informed the little one that the real seafloor is cold and dark, moreover, it is not at all beautiful. Our hero couldn't understand why the stranger was talking about the ocean like that. However, when the girl's huge eyes looked at him, the young man thought only that this stranger was very beautiful. Moreover, the young man liked the laughter of this passenger, and when she winked at him, he realized that his heart was won. But the thoughts and fantasies were short-lived, as the driver announced that they had already arrived at the destination. As he was getting off the train, the guy decided that somewhere along the way, he would pretend to have accidentally bumped into a beauty. But realizing that there were many other people nearby who wanted to do the same, he realized that he wasn't the only one with the idea. In the end, the young man was the last to leave the carriage, but he was more worried about being late for his new job. At this time, interesting events were unfolding in the Platinum Tower, where our hero was heading. A girl was initially upset that she couldn't win, but then switched to thinking that she was successful when she heard someone say hello to her. Hearing that the guy needed Gudan, the secretary became angry that she was being prevented from winning, and immediately added that the visitor should go straight down the corridor. The young man thought to himself with horror that he had never seen such secretaries before, but just a moment later something happened that left Shisi in real shock, because a man who, among other things, had also been verbally abused, was thrown out of the office. The blonde, addressing the guy, said that he was wrong, and therefore he would do whatever he wanted. Unexpectedly, Gudan, who was the manager of the intermediary services department, hugged our hero and happily announced that they had finally met. Having pushed the guy into some office, the manager told him to sit down while he went and got the necessary information. Looking at the other people who were in the office, the young man realized that he was not the only one who had come to get a job. Perhaps Chisi should have felt uncomfortable, but there was nothing like that. He could not fully understand where he was. Although the young man felt like he was being constantly looked at, he did not finish his thought because at that moment, Gudan came in and announced that he had some information. Having handed out some documents to everyone that spoke about the companies, the manager announced that each person would take on one order at a time. Our hero understood that this was a job for the Kongwang-ji Group, a company one of the 3 largest in the world, but it was unclear what needed to be done. At that moment, the young man understood that this was the price for an introduction to the matter, or more precisely, that this was a den of thieves, which became clear when the guy saw a beaten man in the corridor. Suddenly, the blonde asked if he really understood that this was blackmail. The guy realized that this man also understood everything, but he decided that most likely they all had to pay, otherwise they would be beaten, although they could still try to escape. Our hero understood that he was faced with a difficult situation. It was like a hamster against a snake. Would he be eaten, or would he fight to break free? At that moment, all the applicants began to get indignant and leave, saying that they did not need such a job. But the manager said the young people would only be able to leave the premises once they had paid a consultation fee. Otherwise, they would have to stay longer. Kisa saw how the blonde man began to evade, saying that he was not going to fight, but simply wanted to use his bank card. And again, the young man thought that he didn't want to be beaten. But getting out of this place might not be easy. After a while, a man entered the hall and started flirting with the secretary. But at that moment, Gudan also entered the lobby and greeted Hua. After this, the men began to talk about business, and also about the fact that a lot of money could be made from puppeteers. And then Hua noted that the 3rd floor had already been opened, and also that he had one student whom he was going to teach something. And a moment later, the young man was shouting for the girls not to let him leave. The beauty was telling everyone to move away, but the guy only had time to think that he could be knocked off his feet at any moment. But just as the young man was thinking that he seemed to have seen this girl somewhere before, she tripped and fell right on Chise. Realizing what had happened, the stranger began to apologize and say that she was very sorry, although she then immediately asked how the teenager was feeling. But the guys didn't have time to finish speaking, because the stranger grabbed the girl by the tail with all his strength and pulled her towards him. Hua, turning to someone, explained that he had not noticed that this girl was planning to escape. Sitting on the ground, our hero demanded that the beauty be released, although someone immediately declared that this was the most ordinary business. Gaudan explained that these people came from the agency, and therefore some unemployed person should not interfere in something that does not concern him at all. The girl didn't like being treated roughly, so she struggled, and the guy, in turn, couldn't understand what to do in this situation. The teenager's face showed hatred, and he heard the stranger demanding that the villains let go of her hair. Realizing that his ill-wishers were leaving, the young man realized that he had to act, and so he immediately began pushing everyone around him. The young man himself did not understand where he got the strength to hit Hua, who was holding the girl, as well as several other people who were flying to the side. Grabbing the beauty by the hand, Chise shouted loudly that they needed to run, and as quickly as possible, The villains immediately began asking the security guards why they were standing there and not even trying to do anything. And while the men were deciding who should stay and watch over the debtors and who should catch up with the fugitives, the blonde man was thinking that he hadn't thought that our hero would be so brave. At this time, Chi-Si told his companion that there seemed to be a staircase right in front of them, and therefore they should speed up. Realizing that something needed to change, the young man shouted for the girl to run ahead while he thought of something. Having found some boxes of trash, the young man began to throw everything on the floor in order to prevent the villains from getting through it all, saying that this was the most common tactic. Moving along the corridor, our hero was surprised why his new acquaintance stopped. But at that moment, the guy himself noticed that in front of him were both managers and security, who were threateningly declaring that there was nowhere to run anyway. Gao Dan decided to bargain, and therefore said that if the young man gave up the girl, he would be given a 50% discount on their services. And while the villains tried to persuade and frighten our hero, he stood his ground and proudly declared that he would not give up the girl. And just a moment later, one of the thugs shouted that they would take these guys pretty quickly. Suddenly, one of the employees of this company pointed out that the young people should not be shown mercy because Kisei hit him hard in the face. But then something unusual happened. Two guys appeared out of nowhere and took out the thug while the guy and the girl ran away. It seemed that the young man himself did not understand what was happening, but he did not need to. It turned out that the captives had managed to escape and were now taking revenge on their offenders for luring them into a trap. After a while, the men, who were trying to come to their senses, said that they should not let Chi-Si go, although some were afraid of this guy. Trying to find the fugitives who were hiding around the corner, the men complained that they could not find the young man. The girl didn't understand how much longer they would have to hide, but our hero asked the beauty to be patient, simultaneously asking if she felt any discomfort in this place. Smiling, the new acquaintance thanked her savior, adding that she was fine. The embarrassed young man declared that he didn't need gratitude. He simply did what he had to do, and thought to himself that this was one of his best days. Continuing to hide from their pursuers, Chisei admitted that he believed that no one would run after them, and that no one would look for them. Having pressed with all her strength on the guy's finger, the girl immediately began to laugh, hearing that the young man complained that it hurt, although she immediately decided not to do it anymore, understanding her companion's displeasure. Finally, the girl suddenly and abruptly said that her name was Taozi, remembering that she had not yet given her name, after which she asked her new acquaintance to introduce himself. The young man immediately identified himself and began to tell the long story of his name, realizing that the beauty was laughing at him again. Our hero understood that after sunset, the nightlife of the people in South Baishijou was just beginning, and therefore he could actually relax. To make sure that everything would really be okay, Taozi asked again and received an affirmative answer. For a moment, the guy thought the girl was repeating herself because she wanted to thank him again, hearing that it was unnecessary. And then he took off his jacket and asked his friend to put it on. His friend, who again apologized for forcing herself on the guy, the young man did not respond to this remark. He said again that they had come across bad guys, and therefore wanted to know if they had harmed the beauty. After slapping the young man, Taozi said pointedly that her dress had been torn while she was saving someone, and then added in a quieter tone that those bad people had deceived her friend. The advertising campaign her friend was involved in turned out to be a black market company. And so these dishonest people forced the unfortunate woman to take completely different photos than what they had initially promised. The beauty was given time to get herself together, but she used it to send a message, and so, having received it, Taozi immediately went to help. The girl said that her friends managed to smash the equipment, after which they began to run. It was during their escape that she encountered our hero. The young man, having heard this story, asked his friend who she was to break into the lair of such bandits alone. The girl did not answer the question directly. She simply winked at the young man and said that she was glad to have met Chisei. The embarrassed guy thought that he should say at least something, and immediately declared that it was too late, hearing how the beauty noted that the time had already passed since they were supposed to meet with her friend. Quickly writing her phone number on the young man's hand, Taozi told him not to forget to write to her, noting that now she was not afraid of bandits. As she ran away, the girl said that someday she would repay her savior and immediately reminded him not to forget to call her. Standing in the middle of the street, our hero thought that his acquaintance could have been a little more feminine, but on the other hand, he was still glad that he met her. Returning to the establishment, the ill-wishers honestly admitted that they had let the fugitives escape. Lighting a cigarette, Hua angrily said that after this his people still had the courage to return. Realizing that the villain was seriously angry, the guards immediately tried to retreat, telling the man to calm down because they would go searching again. But Hua immediately began insulting his workers, saying that they couldn't even find two teenagers, let alone more serious matters. Unexpectedly, Gu Deng stood up for the boys, saying that there was no need to argue and that everything could be explained calmly. But this phrase alarmed the leader, But the guy explained to Hua that this guy had registered with them before, and therefore the home address of this Chisei was in the database. Upon hearing this, the leader shouted even louder, pointing out that if they had information, why had no one acted yet? And just a moment later, the villain declared that as soon as he dialed the young man's phone number, everyone was obliged to remain silent, and he himself would talk to him. But not much time passed and the guards heard the nickname Q, realizing that their leader was calling some old man. Huo Yu, who was the leader of the Emerald Wolf Gang, immediately asked if Hua was really in trouble, and heard him ask for some men to be sent to him. The man did not want to give up his people, but the ill-wisher insisted on his own, saying that he wanted to punish one boy. Opening his eyes, our hero did not understand where he found himself. The guy was sure that he was lying on his bed. However, some creepy voice called the teenager by name and demanded something incomprehensible from him. Kisu, as before, did not understand anything, and therefore asked the stranger to show himself, although in fact the young man was very scared. The stranger continued to frighten our hero, repeating that he had finally found him. The young man understood that this devilish voice, which also laughed, was creepy, but he did not understand to whom it belonged. The young man didn't understand what was funny, although a moment later he noticed his bloody hand, not understanding where he had managed to get hurt. The frightened hero tried to understand where he was, but he was unsuccessful. Moreover, he was disturbed by the fact that for some reason he could not move, as if some invisible force was holding him in a net. For a moment it seemed that the young man would not be able to get out of here, but the very next minute, Chisei found himself in his own bed, thinking that the dream was strange. Although immediately, upon examining himself, the young man discovered wounds that should not have been there. Looking at his dagger, the boy decided that it was quite possible that he had simply been sleepwalking and had accidentally injured himself. Standing in the shower, our hero reminded himself that he clearly remembered throwing the dagger into the living room and not leaving it in the bedroom. But then he noticed the numbers, which were partially smudged. However, the teenager immediately came to his senses and remembered that he had Taozi's phone number written on his hand, something the boy had completely forgotten about. Sitting in the room, the blonde was glad that he had managed to escape, glad about this turn of events, and then he remembered Chisei, saying that, most likely, they would cross paths again. That same evening, the award ceremony took place at Goodno Technology, and it was a truly magnificent event. Standing outside the door, the guy was thinking that he was starting to get nervous because he didn't think he would be taking part in such a grand ceremony. And while Chisei was thinking about how good it was that he hadn't overslept, the girls approached him and greeted the young man with the utmost politeness. The employees asked the young man to put on the costume they had prepared for him, adding that it would even include a scepter, which greatly surprised the young man. As he headed to the locker room, the teenager said that he understood everything and therefore went to change. When our hero left, the beauties said that he had arrived without a ribbon, and therefore it was difficult to recognize him as a champion, and his face was quite ordinary. Upon entering the wardrobe, the young man immediately began to introduce himself and say who he was, as well as the purpose of his visit. Preparing for his appearance, the young man said that he was the champion of the year, and therefore he wanted them to take care of him. Looking at his suit, Chisei declared that it was too heavy for him, although he immediately heard someone's voice saying that the guy could be heard from outside. A moment later, the teenager looked up and asked in surprise who was talking to him. And while our hero was telling the blonde that they had seen each other literally since the morning, he said that it turned out that Chisei had gotten to this scepter, which he found hard to believe. After this, our hero, with a somewhat dissatisfied look, declared that his opponent, or rather the one who took second place, was standing in front of him, and that was precisely why he was angry. At this moment, the host Bao Bao informed everyone present that the award ceremony was about to begin. Chisei, who heard himself being called the champion, seemed not to fully realize that he was the one standing on the stage and that he was the one being interviewed. The guy tried to say something, but nothing came out, especially after they told him that there would be a special guest at the party. At that moment, Taozi, who was the representative of the Kongwon group, appeared on the stage and was supposed to give a speech. Winking at our hero, the girl hinted that the young man should not tell anyone about what had happened recently. And while the girl was collecting her thoughts, the blonde looked at her attentively. After this, the beauty happily stated that she would like to congratulate their winners. Moreover, she hopes that more players will join them in the future. Listening to this girl speak, the guy thought that he felt like some kind of loser who had imagined all sorts of things for himself. After some time, a man on the roof of Goodno Technology reported that he was watching Chisei, but he was doing nothing. While giving instructions to someone, the blonde heard the guy say that he would be able to arrest the criminal, and it would not be a problem for him. After which the man on the roof noted that he would finally be able to take on some other task. The young man stood majestically on the roof and looked intently ahead, and, putting on his glasses, he said out loud that he was promising our hero good luck, although he didn't specify anything else. As he walked through the city at night, the boy thought that he hadn't thought the event would end so late. but he was worried that Taozi had left too early, as if she was in a hurry. The guy remembered their last conversation, which concerned the jacket, and decided for himself that they should meet again. But a moment later, the young man heard some strange steps and saw a shadow in front of him, and therefore decided that there was someone in the alley. Suddenly, our hero saw a whole gang asking if he was really Shisei, and so he thought to himself about how best to deal with the situation. At some point, the young man decided that it would be better for him to give a different name, saying that there had been a mistake, but the bandits said that there was no need to hide behind that. They recognized the teenager perfectly well. Having collected his thoughts, the guy decided that they were looking for him. But these villains were not like those from whom he managed to escape. Despite this, it was necessary to remain vigilant. The opponents weren't going to wait for anything, so one of them swung his club and immediately began insulting our hero. The young people said that the teenager had provoked the Emerald Wolf Gang and therefore should be killed. As he dodged, the teenager thought that there were too many villains, and therefore it would be difficult for him to fight back. Moreover, he didn't even think that someone could ambush him in the alley. And while the bandits surrounded the teenager, he thought about how, having become a champion, he was able to meet the girl he liked again. However, what was a little depressing was that after this meeting, the guy had to be beaten in this dirty place. But the very next minute, something went wrong. Firstly, our hero's blade appeared from somewhere, and secondly, something incomprehensible happened to the villains, and therefore they cursed more menacingly than ever. Now it seemed that the young man himself had changed, which was noticed by his ill-wishers, who said that the young man should not do this. One of the villains, looking at the boy, noted to himself that something seemed strange to him, as if this dagger had flown to the boy on its own. And this was not only strange, but also dangerous, because Kisi had become completely different. And so the leader ordered his people to quickly deal with the guy, and only the young man himself did not care at all. Although he heard that the villains were complaining that their opponent had become incredibly strong, the young man understood that he had no time to waste, and so he easily defeated his rivals. The men tried to do something. They were well aware that they were in the majority, but it did not help them in any way. Realizing that the forces were not equal, some of the gang members were already running away, saying that they had no idea who this guy was or why he was so strong. At this moment, Hua blocked the way for several fugitives, asking you if they were really going to escape. The man was angry about this, but he was even more dissatisfied with the fact that somehow Chi-Si had become a completely different person, as if the dagger had somehow influenced him. At this moment, the frustrated Hua called for help from Dong, who promised to save the situation. However, a few minutes earlier, what happened was that the remaining members of the gang, realizing that something was wrong, also decided to flee. Looking at the pills lying on the floor, the gang leader turned to Dong and asked what was happening to him. But he only smiled that everyone could come to him to feel good. The man didn't say anything. He just remembered that the young man had a thing that allowed him to increase his adrenaline, thereby increasing his own endurance several times over. Our hero, looking at his new rival, thought that this was a prohibited drug among the gang, and therefore it was unclear where this man got it. And only the enemy did not think about anything. He looked carefully at the boy, ready to attack him at any moment. Despite this, the young man was in no hurry to do anything. He was prepared for any turn of events. Dong accelerated and struck with all his might where our hero had recently been. Looking ahead in horror, the young man began to curse, saying that the boy had somehow managed to dodge him, which was something incredible. The guy who was standing behind his opponent immediately struck him, putting his opponent on his back. There was some hatred and even anger in Chi-Si's eyes, but at the same time he remained silent. Suddenly, the opponent jumped up from his seat and immediately grabbed the young man by the face, quickly pushing him aside. The man actually somehow managed to literally slam the teenager into some stone wall. Hua, who was watching everything from around the corner, couldn't believe that his acquaintance's strength was so great. Despite this, our hero did not even think about giving up, and therefore he dealt a very strong blow to his opponent. He clearly didn't expect anything like that, and so he looked closely at the young man, but it was clear that the young man was not going to give up, and so he hit even harder to knock the villain out of the game. For a moment, Dong looked at the guy again carefully, but he immediately put the bandit back down. Lying on the ground, the ill-wisher continued to say that there was a real monster in front of him. At that moment, it seemed that Chi-Se had transformed from an ordinary boy into a true ruler, who had even grown in size. The villain, who was being held tightly by the young man, thought that he was going to meet his end in the hands of this worthless man. But the very next moment, Hua, who grabbed a pistol and began shooting at our hero, said that this was the end of it for him. But then something inexplicable happened. The man looked closely at the young man and thought that he had hit him 3 times, but he was still standing. After some time, the young man dealt with all the villains who were in that place. Chi-Su felt like he was doing something incredible, and doing it quite quickly. However, a few minutes later, sitting against the wall, the guy said that his whole body hurt, At that moment, a girl appeared in the alley and said that she was looking for the young man, and he noted that it was Mary, whom he had seen backstage. The beauty greeted the young man, but she said that she was glad to see the king of the fallen angels, Lord Lucifer himself. The demon that was in our hero's body declared that he would no longer be able to use this boy, and the girl only noted that 300 years had already passed. Mary tried to do something about it, but Lucifer told her to stay away from him. Pointing to the dead, the demon asked if this was really what the beauty had wanted, and he added that this child has not yet awakened. He cannot even bear his power. If she gives him the dagger that kills God, it will end badly. After this, he ordered Mary to kill the young man, and along with him, Lucifer. But the brunette confusedly stated that she couldn't do that because the knife was already tied to Chisei, and therefore she could speed up his awakening, although the demon didn't like that idea. Seeing that the body that belonged to our hero had fallen to the ground, the girl screamed loudly. And then she told the master not to worry, because when the guy woke up, she would make it so that no one would be able to find him. And, hugging the young man, she continued to say that no matter how much time passes, she will continue to wait for Lucifer. As for all the dead, Mary decided that it would be best for them to disappear, and then began to do something magical. After this, the beauty took up the dagger, wishing that it would return to another place. The next day at the police station, the conversation was about routine work matters. One of the chiefs asked Zhao about what had happened the day before at the old harbor. Realizing that there had been some kind of incident there, the men noted that the showdown was carried out by the Emerald Wolves gang. They have a recording from the harbor, but no one can say whether it was faked. But, unfortunately, no one could really see anything because the recording was of the lowest quality. After this, some girl noted that important documents had arrived from headquarters. The documents made it clear that the case was being handed over to someone else, even though the staff wanted to get to the bottom of the truth and find out what really happened. But a moment later, one of the employees' eyes widened and he said that they were talking about some Chinese group. The caveat is that this group is outside the jurisdiction of the country's security bureau. They are rumored to be a mysterious group that takes care of internal conflicts and top-secret missions. Everyone knew that the Emerald Wolf Gang was relatively strong, so what the Dragon Group was for was not entirely clear. The girl said that they had to hand over this case, as the director had ordered, although the commander said that they would hand over the case a little later, when they had collected more necessary information. At this time, the gang that was actively pursuing our hero was sitting in the bar. They were talking about the strength of some of their guys. Suddenly, a man approached Hua and said that they had managed to find Dong. After this, the man was brought into the hall and explained that he had been to the old harbor, although the question remained regarding the unusual dagger. The gray-haired man sitting further away wanted to know where the rest of the people were, and immediately heard that no one else had returned. Upon hearing this, the man immediately began to get angry and shout that in this case the search should continue until they could at least find out something. Unexpectedly for everyone, Dong began to bow to the master, talking about killing him, and immediately announced that a magic dagger had arrived. And then he asked if everything he had seen and everything that concerned the guy and the dagger was really true. Lighting a cigarette, Hua thoughtfully noted that this young man was either lying or he was the same as himself. And a moment later, he turned to his spiritual master, who did not immediately respond. The old man immediately declared that the young man should gather all the people and be sure to find both the boy and the dagger. Lying in bed, Chisi noted to himself that his whole body ached, although he could not understand the reason, nor why it was so difficult to open his eyes. The guy suddenly remembered as if something had come out of him the day before, although he didn't know what exactly. Standing in an incomprehensible space, the young man tried to understand whether he was really still asleep. But at that moment, our hero saw some strange figure who said that it was she who had called the teenager here, although he hoped that he would wake up any minute and this nightmare would end. The shadow continued to say that Chisei probably knows what a dream is, but this is what reality is. And without waiting for an answer, the unknown person showed some strange picture, asking if this was it. The guy didn't understand where such an interesting screen came from in front of him, but after just a second, the young man felt as if he was inside this picture, and the unknown person continued to talk about how the whole world is amazing in its own way. The new replaces the old. Changes are constant. So-called reality is constantly changing. Kise could not comprehend everything, but the shadow noted that this was the true reality of the universe, because it was an element. Suddenly, the guy felt like he was flying somewhere into the abyss, where there was no one and nothing. But less than a minute passed and the young man realized for himself that for some reason he had stopped, and the voice continued to say that everything is born from these elements. Kisi listened attentively to this, while the shadow noted that no matter how the outside world changed, the power of the elements was eternal, adding that if the young man could control all of this, all of life would be under his control. Our hero did not fully understand what was being said to him, and therefore noted that, rather, earth, water, fire, and air are the essence of the elements, At this time, in his physical world, the teenager felt unwell, which he thought about while in his subconscious. But for him, it all remained a big mystery. The shadow said that the boy's fragile body was being destroyed to such an extent that it was even harming his subconscious. The young man immediately began to wail, saying that he didn't want any of this, but the stranger told him to shut up. Seeing that something unnatural was happening, the young man asked in horror what they wanted to do to him. And a moment later, he joyfully declared that this was real bliss, thinking to himself that perhaps he would never feel pain again. But what surprised our hero most was that the water looked strange, and even more surprising was that it enveloped his body. At that moment, the stranger declared that this was nothing other than real magic, which would help absorb the element of water, stabilize the condition, and heal injuries. The young man's task was to remember this magic and live on. Opening his eyes, the young man continued to hear a voice in his head, which told him to control the elements, to feel the power within himself, to live on, adding that it would always be with him. However, there was no time to think about this, because the very next minute, Kisi heard some suspicious noise outside the door. Someone was saying that the young man was at home. The bandits discussed among themselves that Huo Yue had ordered them not only to find the boy, but also to beat up the one our hero had clearly heard. Entering the living room, the men were ordered to move on, realizing that there was no one in the first room. Only a moment passed before one of the ill-wishers shouted to everyone that he had found the guy, but then something happened that no one expected. The teenager grabbed the table alarm clock, threw it at his pursuer, and climbed onto the windowsill. The bandits didn't think the young man was going to jump, but he said with a smile on his face that they should watch him closely and learn from him. And then something indescribable happened, because everyone gathered saw fire. It was a powerful explosion, and so the men, turning to Flame, asked him that there was probably nothing left of the boy. But the leader, seeing a hole in the wall, declared that it was not enough to kill someone, although the man was now pointing to the height, saying that if you fall from that height, you can break your neck. However, the villain, seeing the stairs, shouted that their fugitive had gone to the roof, and therefore they needed to follow him. Sitting on the roof, our hero thought about how the Emerald Wolves gang was actually crazy, but what struck him most was the flaming fist, not understanding how they could have come to this. But the young man did not finish his thought, because a minute later the entire gang was standing behind him, fully assembled, listening to the young man offer to talk to them. However, the leader was not going to listen to anything. He said that he could not be bribed because he needed the boy. Holding his dagger in his hand, Chisa said in fear that if the villains came closer to him, he would no longer be so polite. The boy happily said that he had in his hands a magic blade that he had received from a gaming competition, although the villains only made fun of him. Suddenly, our hero was literally slammed into the wall by a powerful fiery blow. However, the very next second, the young man saw a large reservoir of water in front of him. And while the boy was climbing onto this reservoir, the villain shouted that either the boy would show him the dagger or he would be destroyed by the water. Seeing the flames growing ever stronger, our hero, realizing that the water was already very close, hoped for his salvation. The ill-wishers understood that Chisei had climbed inside, and therefore did not understand how to proceed. Although a minute later, Flame ordered his guys to go and take the dagger from the teenager, and he didn't care how they were going to do it. While in the tank, the guy thought that he had miraculously managed to escape, and moreover, that he was lucky that this vat existed. At that moment, ill-wishers appeared before the young man again, telling him to give up the dagger. If this did not happen, they would simply beat him. And again, something unusual happened, because Chisei began to sink to the bottom of the container, thinking that he did not want to die yet. After this, a voice appeared in his head and ordered the young man to remember the formation that was magic. The guy didn't understand what was happening to him because the shadow that the young man had seen earlier was now helping him. And it really was some kind of magic, because the young man somehow managed to stay underwater and feel comfortable. For a moment, our hero felt like he could breathe freely. Moreover, Chisa managed to create some amazing formation, although he himself did not understand how this was possible. Suddenly, the villains, looking into the water, noted that they did not see any movement, and therefore were sure that the boy had drowned. And a minute later, they reported to Flame that there was still no movement visible underwater, and therefore they were ready to get the blade for him. However, before the men could do anything, they immediately began to scream in horror about how everything was shaking for some reason, believing that the young man might be alive. Suddenly, some unseen force began to throw ill-wishers into the water and drag them to the bottom. And while the villains were asking their boss to help them and do at least something, he was happy, saying that he had encountered something interesting. Flame watched the water closely, which now resembled some kind of storm, and said that he wanted much more. And this greater thing happened because at some point two elements clashed with each other, each of which had something to show. Not much time passed, and the man was already complaining about what he saw. The man thought to himself that it seemed like he had initially underestimated this guy, who had always been incredibly strong. Realizing that he needed to move on, our hero stood on the edge of the container, but continued to use magic. The ill-wishers immediately shouted that the boy was still alive, and he calmly noted that Flame had already wanted to see what he was capable of. And in a calmer tone, he added, "If this is so, then why is the man flying on the ground if he should already be passing by?" By controlling the power of water, Chise began to insult his opponent, realizing that he now had practically nothing to fear. The guy was angry. He said that the bandits dared to destroy his house, but now they are just standing there. And before they were so proud of their fiery fist, perhaps for the first time in his life, the teenager was so confident in himself, and therefore was not going to stop, saying that he had not yet shown everything. And when our hero decided to show off the water dragon, he realized with apprehension that for some reason nothing was working. Realizing that, most likely, his strength had run out, Chise was at a loss as to what to do, while his opponent was pondering the fact that the young man had not yet figured out how to use his strength. The young man saw a stream of fire heading towards him, and he thought to himself that the villain would not be ashamed to do such a thing in front of an unarmed man. A minute later, our hero was caught in the flames and began to scream because he was so hot. Hiding in the tank, the boy realized that the water was getting hotter because it was being heated. But this did not last long. The next second something happened, and the barrel burst, and the young man fell from the roof, screaming for at least someone to help him. Suddenly, a blonde man appeared next to the young man, who seemed to appear out of thin air. Addressing our hero, the stranger warned the teenager to prepare for landing, and at that moment, when the blonde directed the guy somewhere, he looked in horror, not understanding what would happen to him next. After this, the young man decided to land the villains, who were also falling from the roof. Lying on the floor, one of the ill-wishers was about to say something, but could not do it. As for Chise, he felt unwell, although the ill-wisher noted that this was how it should be, hearing at the same time the question about who he was. Taking off his glasses, the blonde man said that he belonged to the Chinese dragon group. He was Operative Captain Ruim. Our hero tried to say something, and at this time Flame was thinking about the fact that they were in a not very good situation. And it seemed that his thoughts were read by the blonde man, who immediately turned to the man and said that they had not seen each other for a long time, which greatly surprised Chise. After this, Ruim said that in front of him was a second-rate killer, whom he never expected to meet here. Our hero thought there would be a fight, but instead the villain started to run. But our hero was even more surprised by the speed of his new acquaintance, who had no intention of leaving things just like that. Having caught up with the villain, the young man immediately asked him where he was going to run. Flame wanted to do something, but after just a minute he was dealt a strong blow that threw him off balance. Having thrown his opponent as high as possible, the blonde asked what he had said about the strong wind. And while the fight continued, Chise thought about how it looked so easy and simple that it was literally amazing. And only Flame didn't like all this. He didn't understand where this boy got so much strength from. The man immediately called upon fire to help himself and was already heading in the direction where our hero stood. The boy heard his friend warning him of danger, but it seemed that the teenager could not move. The young man still didn't understand how magic worked, but he silently asked himself for it to work now, because he couldn't think of anything else. And it worked. While the ill-wisher was thinking about striking, the young man managed to form a water ball and send it as far as possible. Flame screamed while in the sphere of water, not understanding why he couldn't destroy it, since nothing like this had ever happened before. Moreover, the man did not understand why the flame was moving in a different direction. Within a minute, the young man saw the results of his work, which were simply unimaginable. Seeing that our hero had fallen to the ground, Ruim said that his help was not even needed, although he immediately became interested in what had happened to the young man and why he was crawling on the ground. Having fallen to the ground, the teenager tried to somehow compare the men, but his new acquaintance noted that the teenager had no manners. Standing in front of a house, Taozi said that she had found what she was looking for, adding that this was where Chise lived. And just a moment later, the girl heard a plane fly over her, which she looked at carefully. After some time, our hero remembered how just recently he stood on the street in an ice cream costume and complained that no one came into the cafe. At the same time, some people were telling the teenager, who didn't understand anything, that it was quite difficult to find him. The man declared with anger in his voice that the time had come, and therefore he would take revenge. The young man, holding his hat, did not understand how this was even possible. However, a minute later he was surprised not by this, but by the fact that for some reason the rain was red. Now the teenager saw a dagger in his hands. He did not understand how this weapon got to him, after which it seemed to him that he was flying somewhere. The guy screamed as loud as he could, but he still couldn't quite figure out where he was. Sitting on the bed, Chise looked at his bandages and thought that it really hurt. The young man clearly remembered being on the roof of a house, after which the barrel burst and he fell down. But after that, he did not remember anything. Rim heard his guest talking under his breath, and so he told him that he was in the sky. After these words, the guy began to panic, saying that he couldn't just die like that, which was funny for the others present to hear. Rum decided not to frighten the teenager, and therefore stated that he was on the plane, although these words did not calm the young man, who now believed that he had been kidnapped. Chi-Si thought it was a joke, and what's more, he didn't understand what they wanted to do to him. Sitting on a chair, the young man smiled at the young man, and this scared him a little. However, the blonde called our hero by name and told him to listen to him as carefully as possible. And then he continued to talk about how he is one of the Chinese dragon group. He is responsible for everything related to spiritual masters in the city. Ruim said in a calm tone that he had been observing the teenager for a long time, although the latter did not understand whether he really belonged to the spiritual masters. The blonde noted that it didn't matter whether the guy admitted it or not, but he could say for sure that the young man should have already felt it, that mysterious power that was growing inside him. Listening to this man, Chi-Si thought that perhaps this man was saying this because he knew about the dagger. However, the boy's friend continued to say that this force was very powerful and that it was necessary to learn to control it, adding that they had conducted a medical examination of the teenager. There is a bullet that is located right next to the teenager's heart, and therefore he could die at any moment. The young man listened to this with horror. He could not believe that it was actually true. For a moment, it seemed to the young man that his nightmare had come true, although he had hoped that the outcome would be different. But Ruim, without giving him time to think, continued to talk about how they were going to a certain place, and as long as the guy was a master of the spirit, he would be able to save his life. Although the young man doubted to the end that he was actually a master, our hero still wanted to ask about something. But at that moment, the blonde man announced that they needed to prepare for landing. Looking at some island in the ocean, the young man asked with horror in his voice about where they were, and also what awaited them in the future. And while the young man's new acquaintance was telling him to get ready to go out, Chi-Si was wondering if it was true that they were going out to start a fight. Suddenly, the system notified that all location data had been calibrated and that the plane was entering the magnetic field of the designated area. And then some inexplicable things started to happen. Lying on the floor, our hero asked about this secret place and what was happening to them. Looking at the pretty girl, Room tried to explain that they were affected by a magnetic field, which was still very strong. After this, one of the group members began to hint to the blonde about his not entirely decent behavior in front of everyone. However, the girl began to reproach the young man, who said that in fact it all happened very by accident. At this point, the conversation was interrupted by Chi-Si, who continued to lie on the floor, saying that if the beauty had come a little closer, she would have stepped on him. The girl immediately said that she was a mechanic expert from the Chinese dragon group, not a sister, and immediately asked where the guy came from, believing that their leader brought him. The young man answered the question, but he was frightened by this beauty, who openly stated that she did not sense any spiritual energy in the teenager. Moreover, she looked at the blonde man in surprise and asked if it was really this man he had been following for several months, having heard that this was the case. But now even the team member himself was not sure that it was this young man. And then he added that everything changed when Chi-Si wasn't afraid to go alone against Flame, and therefore it was best to bring him to the island to find out everything there. The girl cautiously stated that the number of spiritual masters was growing, but also those who thought it was just a rumor, although the blonde explained that none of this mattered. Their job was to seek out such people and direct their power in the right direction, and he immediately added that there was no point in worrying as long as he was next to her, although it seemed that the girl did not like this. And just a moment later, using one of her techniques, the beauty laid Ruim on the floor, angrily declaring that he should not call her sister either. The guy came closer to his friend and asked how he was feeling, having learned that everything was fine with him. Suddenly, the system again announced that preparations for landing were complete and the descent was over. Running off somewhere, Ruim shouted loudly for the teenager to follow him, adding that the girl had set the plane to automatic mode. But our hero didn't like it. Chi-Si approached the seat, hearing the blonde man cursing, saying that the guy was taking too long, while the latter complained that he could not fasten his seatbelt. And then everyone inside felt that the plane had actually begun to descend. But then something happened that the young man did not expect at all. It seemed to him as if they were falling down somewhere. Suddenly, Chi-Si realized that he hadn't really imagined it, because the aircraft was rapidly heading towards the water. The young man screamed louder than ever. He said that this was not a landing, but a real fall, and therefore he did not know what to expect next. The girl immediately noted that they had entered the water. The plane was continuing to descend, then switching to underwater mode. The sonars were activated. Everyone should prepare for an even deeper dive. Our hero, seeing the 100-meter mark on the device, thought that this was clearly too much. But after just a few minutes, this depth changed. Now it was 1,000 meters, and the mechanic continued to say that the pressure would increase because the dive was not yet complete. The teenager heard the blonde man talking about how they were at a depth of 1,200 meters. On the one hand, it was frightening, but on the other hand, it was amazing and beautiful. And then he added that the guests lost consciousness so quickly that he didn't even realize that they had reached their destination, and now they could prepare for docking. Hearing that the docking had begun, Chisi became a little quiet, although his acquaintance had told him to at least smile a little. Suddenly, Ruim shouted joyfully that they could relax because they had already arrived. The frightened and exhausted guy immediately jumped up from his seat and ran somewhere, hearing behind him that the door was on the other side. Seeing what was happening to the teenager, the girl who came out of the cockpit asked if everything was okay with their passenger, receiving an ambiguous answer. After just a few minutes, Chisi realized that he was being dragged somewhere, but he actively resisted, saying that they were underwater and therefore could not move so easily. But when he got off the plane, the young man was surprised that there was no water around them. There was dry land everywhere. Heading somewhere forward, the guy asked about these statues, but the blonde did not have time to explain, and therefore was now angry that they were heading in the wrong direction. After this, Ruim noted that now nothing mattered, because the young man had activated the night guard gate. Looking in horror at the monster in front of him, the teenager asked several times whether it really was a gate. The blonde repeated that this was true, and added that to activate the gate you simply need to place your hand on it. Our hero did what he was told, and immediately stated that he had some kind of strange feeling. The guy said he felt like light was flowing through his blood vessels, penetrating his body, searching for something. And behind his back, they were already talking about the gate reacting to him. Chi-Siu looked at everything that was happening in horror and did not believe that this was actually possible. And the very next minute, some unknown force threw the young man back. The disgruntled teenager sat on the floor and complained that it was an electric gate and it was broken, while the girl pointed out that he was just an ordinary boy, not a spirit master. Reem thought about what had just happened. He decided that the gate itself didn't know who this guy was. Now the girl wanted to approach the gate, although our hero was afraid that he might hit her too. But he learned that this was a very ordinary test, and therefore there was no need to be afraid. The young man still wanted to find out whether he was a master or not. But he heard that they might need a thorough examination. At that moment, the gates greeted the guests, saying that the way was open. Kisu stood and watched attentively what was happening. It seemed to him that he was sleeping. However, his companions told him not to stand there because it was time for them to move on. Seeing the upside-down city, which was an island of eternal night, the young man noted that this could not be, deciding that he had been fed something on the plane. The guy was confused by the fact that the city was located upside down, and therefore did not know how to get there at all. But he was shown a heavenly elevator that could take him to his destination very quickly. While standing in line, Chisi thought that there were a lot of people in this place, and the blonde man said that the reason was because it was time to apply for admission to the university, which takes place once every 3 years. Now the young man could not understand whether there were educational institutions in this strange place. When he entered the elevator, the guy didn't understand where the seatbelts were, which scared him a lot. Realizing that the elevator was accelerating, our hero grabbed the scarf of the man sitting in front and didn't want to listen to the fact that seatbelts were completely unnecessary. And indeed, it was absolutely calm inside, because there was its own gravity here, which smoothed out all possible vibrations. After this, a quarrel began between the new acquaintances regarding the fact that the teenager should behave calmly, but now he looks like some kind of fool. But at that moment, some stranger, being in the elevator, looked attentively at our hero, not understanding who he was. Realizing that the elevator had started to turn, Chisei jumped up from his seat to watch it happen. The young man was worried that from now on he would have to learn to live upside down, but his friends said that the energy core of the night releases its own gravity, counteracting the gravity of the earth, and therefore nothing unusual would happen. After this, the guy started talking about some owner of this place who was supposed to have more power than a nuclear warhead. Hearing about this, the guy began to be surprised, wondering if this place was really created by a person. But our hero's acquaintances immediately started talking about how the owner is a daring and crazy person, but still thinks that he is amazing. Suddenly, the girl hit her companions. She said that they had no right to say such things about her father, having heard that now everything was clear to everyone. Although a moment later, the young man again asked about what kind of place this was, hearing the blonde man say that it was most likely some kind of school. And he immediately added that this educational institution accepts only masters of the spirit. Ruim explained that almost everyone here had special abilities, as those who were of the same clan had to stick together. Despite this, the teenager was not clear why this place was underwater, remembering that prisons are usually built here. The embarrassed young man noted that he doubted that this was actually a school, although the blonde immediately told the boy to keep quiet for a bit. The stranger, who was sitting not far from our heroes, thought to himself that this was very interesting, and he said out loud to his assistant to find out who the black-haired guy was, whom he had never seen before. Diana said in a soft tone that she was an assistant, not a servant. But the young man only added that he saw some kind of thick fog on the body of that young man. The passengers decided that a new spiritual master had appeared, capable of blocking the eye of Horus. And while the blonde man was studying Chisei, everyone heard that they had already arrived at their destination. As they exited the elevator, those present again heard the voice that welcomed them to the paradise of spiritual masters. And only the guy did not believe that they were underwater. He was surprised that in this place the sky was blue, and there were even clouds. But the blonde man said that this was all real. Moreover, it was the result of immersion in ecology. The young man knew that he had to follow his acquaintance, although he said that he had seen a large gate in a completely different direction. At one point, the young man stopped and said that he did not see Mia, but his companion noted that she was the owner's daughter, and therefore had a number of privileges and could have gone another way. At this time, the blonde was looking through information about new students, but did not find what he needed. The young man understood that Chisei was not the one who was going to enroll this year, although he thought to himself that he had a feeling that they would meet again very soon. Standing somewhere in the middle of the forest, the teenager noted that this was some kind of strange path. The young man realized that there was some kind of catch, and so he began to swear and blame his friend, who told the guy not to worry and to follow him. The young man and his friend climbed over the fence, but the teenager did not understand why they were doing this. Instead of answering, the blonde asked if Chisei thought it was somehow very quiet in this place. And the very next moment, the boy asked with displeasure why the mentor had hit him. And so hard at that. And while our hero was indignant, saying that he did not understand why he was brought to such a place, Ruim told the young man to run, noting that they had already arrived. At this time, an armed man said that his team members should guard the perimeter because they saw two targets. The young man heard the blonde man say that the ill-wishers had left, although he had no idea who they were talking about. The teenager did not understand why they decided to immediately send him to his death. And again, Chisei became aggressive when he heard that this path was a forbidden area. People should not enter, so those soldiers were aggressive. After this, the men began to discuss the number of people, realizing that they only saw two so far. Although the young man suddenly added that he sees several more people, adding that his eyesight is actually good because he is always number one in the computer game. But at that moment, armed men standing on the rooftops shouted that they saw intruders. Some men shouted for our heroes to surrender, while others said that it would be best to destroy them. Seeing that these people had weapons, Chisei began to panic, suggesting that they run away, and the blonde man calmly stated that they were spotted when they jumped over the fence. The guy didn't understand what his friend wanted to do, but he remained silent, and so Chisei declared that life was more important, and so he pulled out the white flag. Adjusting his glasses, the young man said there was no need to rush. Our hero was shocked when he saw the blonde man walk forward, shouting that he could figure everything out in 3 seconds. At that moment, the people with weapons began to shoot, but Ruim was much faster next to them and was already knocking the weapons out of their hands. Ill-wishers did not understand who this man was, who did incredible things, and only the blonde had no time to waste on talking or anything like that. He knew his task well. At that moment, the commander ordered Bravo Team to move forward. Smiling, our hero's acquaintance merely asked a rhetorical question about whether anyone really thought he could be stopped. Picking up speed, the young man ran in the direction where the ill-wishers were. Landing right in front of them, he simply greeted them. Reem knew that they were looking for him, but this didn't frighten him, quite the opposite. Peering out from behind the tree, Yeezy couldn't believe his eyes. He understood that a computer game was one thing, but reality was something completely different. Although I immediately became frightened by the fact that, for some reason, it became very quiet, the blonde only said in a joyful voice that it was a very simple and, most importantly, quick battle. Our hero was about to relax, realizing that it was amazing, but he immediately started shouting to his friend to be careful because the roof was still not cleared. The blonde heard what they told him and immediately turned his head in fear. Suddenly, Ruim fell to the ground, and the teenager ran out of his hiding place and started screaming for the young man not to dare die. The people standing on the roof were happy that the target had been hit, although not everyone was convinced that this was the end. The sniper said that he did not see any danger because the guy who was very fast was hit and was no longer there. However, a few seconds before this, our hero once again warned his friend that there should be a sniper on the roof. But in an instant, the young man deliberately fell to the ground. It seemed as if the bullet had actually hit him, as everything looked so natural. The blonde knew that no one would particularly study his face, and so he lay there and smiled. The sniper nervously said that the target was lost, hearing that he was being ordered to find it again. Although a moment later Ruim was found, not on the ground, but on the roof of one of the buildings. Taking something out of his pocket, the young man happily said that he had a gift for these ill-wishers. Jumping up, the blonde kicked the bottle towards the direction where the snipers were. The young man knew that he himself needed to leave this place as quickly as possible. The people on the roof realized that they needed to destroy the intruder as quickly as possible. However, a second later, the villains said that someone had thrown them a tear-filled eye, and that was why they could no longer see anything. The blonde heard all the shouts, including threats directed at him that this was not the end. Suddenly, the ill-wisher who was on the roof jumped down and said that the uninvited guests should be seized immediately. Our hero's friend understood that this opponent was not weak and therefore began to defend himself. After this, a verbal altercation began between the men, because each wanted to show themselves and their abilities. But the villain didn't care who said what about him, because he had a clear goal. Our hero watched everything that was happening carefully, because he understood that his life depended on it. At that moment, the ill-wisher began to cause some kind of discharges. Rem knew this and dodged it expertly, seeing how these discharges destroyed everything they touched. And so he shouted with boldness in his voice that these were all children's games and that such lightning wouldn't even catch him. And then he shouted about whether the enemy would dare to meet him face to face. The blonde didn't wait for an answer, so he jumped as high as he could and announced that he was already here. The young man struck, and did so not only quickly but also very professionally. Chi-Si, who was still watching everything closely, didn't understand whether this was really a fight. Addressing teacher Koppen, Ruim said that they still had a long way to go, and then he added, "How about calling it a draw?" However, the teacher clowned, saying that they hadn't seen each other for too long. Squeezing the blonde in his arms, the master joyfully announced that they had not seen each other for too long. The teenager saw how tightly they were squeezing his friend, thinking that it would not be long before he died. The teacher stepped aside and shouted that he would settle for a draw this time, but that would not happen next time, and then told the student to stop pretending to be dead. And then he ordered his men to return to base and train. Koppen explained that this was in fact a restricted area, and it was guarded. There had to be weapons and the sniper was real. And while the young man was asking something about weapons, the mentor immediately asked who this boy was, after which he asked, laughing, if it was true that this guy wanted to become a spirit master. He noted that they would learn more about the boy when they checked him in the medical department, which surprised Kisei again. After a while, Chi-Si walked along the corridor of the medical department to go to the laboratory. Smiling, the young man wondered if he really had a chance to gain superpowers. Hearing that it was indeed so, but it was important to get results first. After this, our hero began to be interested in the strange superpower, but he realized that they had already reached their destination. Pushing the guy inside, the blonde shouted at the young man not to think too much about talking. The most important thing was to pass the examination successfully. The teenager realized that the door had already closed behind him, but he continued shouting that something was wrong with his friend too, and therefore it wouldn't hurt for him to get checked out, although he immediately switched to what was happening now. Standing in the middle of the large and modern room, Chise said out loud that it was very quiet here. The young man didn't know what to do, so he loudly asked who was in the room and heard that he needed to go to bed. Suddenly, a head resembling a hare's appeared behind the young man and pushed him towards the couch. The guy didn't understand what it was, and so he looked carefully at what was in front of him. This unknown creature said that there are no records about our hero. He is not a student of the island of Night. The young man wanted to explain, but the entity ordered him to lie down because the scanning had begun. After this, the guy heard that he saw a ruptured aorta, but other vital organs were normal. The cause was unknown, but presumably near the heart. Then the psychic analysis began, but it failed. The system returned an error, which was something very strange. Kisu didn't understand why it became so quiet again, but suddenly the system said that psychic energy can prevent death, but psychic energy is zero. However, this is not scientific. And just a moment later, a stranger appeared in front of our hero and asked what had happened to him. The guy was scared of this girl, and so he asked her not to be nervous and not to come close to him. Despite the fact that the teenager doubted that there was a living person in front of him, the beauty said that her name was Hibiscus, and she was the Minister of Medicine. Our hero could not understand anything, but the stranger noted that he was protected by a special power. But when it ended, he would die. But Chisei cried and asked for help. At that moment, the medic announced that if the young man wished, he could sign a body donation agreement. Taking the document, the guy began to read what was written there, but he continued to shout that he did not want to stop. But the diagnosis was made. It was psychic energy together with an unknown force, although it was unclear to the young man what this meant. The girl continued to say that they needed to sign the paper and dedicate the body to research, but the teenager screamed and resisted, saying that he was alive and therefore did not know what they wanted from him. The minister stated that from a medical point of view, the boy was already dead, although he suddenly joyfully said that he did not believe the results of this diagnosis. It seemed that the beauty did not like this statement, and therefore she looked closely at the patient. Hearing our hero call the doctor a minor who was just playing with him, Hibiscus threw some kind of container at him, screaming at him to watch his language. And then the beauty added that the diagnosis was her responsibility. If the young man did not believe her, he could, as before, remain a living corpse. But when night falls, his power will disappear due to lack of spiritual energy, and therefore, sooner or later, his body will definitely become hers. Sometime later, standing in the corridor, the boy told what he had been told in the medical office, hearing that he was, in fact, probably not far from death. At that moment, the teenager noticed Ruim and immediately asked where he had been all this time. The blond man explained with sadness in his voice that he had just received a message that there had been an accident in S City. It was a Class A incident. Kisu didn't understand what this meant, but the young man explained that they should return to the Chinese Dragon Group to understand the situation. Hearing that the blonde noted that he would take the guy to the Dragon Group, where he would be safe, he immediately said that he did not want to go anywhere, deciding that he would stay here. Rim didn't understand what this was connected with, but the teenager explained that he was originally brought here. Moreover, if he left the island, he wouldn't be able to last long without spiritual energy. The young man knew that he needed to become a spiritual master, and so he asked to be taught this skill. The blond man said that the young man should not fuss, but he continued to stand his ground, saying that he had some kind of ability on the roof, and therefore he wanted to try again. And then our hero's friend added that if he really decided to stay here, then he would need to meet the requirements and register. The teacher didn't want to give our hero any hope, so he admitted that exams on the island were very sad. Even if a young man has willpower, his psychological energy is zero, although the guy insisted that he still had some potential. And then he said that nothing is impossible in life, especially if it hasn't been done yet. After this, the mentors looked meaningfully at the teenager who really wanted to achieve something. Only a few minutes passed and the men were already heading off somewhere to register. Chisu shouted loudly that he would fight to stay on this island. The blonde had no intention of flattering his acquaintance, so he said that if he failed, he would be taken to the Chinese Dragon Group. The young man wanted to offer our hero his hand, but he stepped aside. Still, having slapped the guy on the hand, the blonde wished him luck, saying that it might not be that easy. Kisu angrily noted that he would not forget his acquaintance's words. As he walked down the street, the young man realized that Ruima's mentor was not a man, but a woman, who was Miss Coppin, and to whom the young man was now turning, asking if everything was okay with her. Laughing, the girl said that she really appreciated the guy's care and immediately began to laugh. After this, the young man began to carefully examine the buildings, not understanding why some were given rather strange names. But our hero was most surprised by the hologram, as well as the fact that the construction of the tower cost $30 million, and therefore he assumed that its director was rich. After this, some people started asking the teacher if it was true that there was a new student with her. Cheesy wanted to know if these guys were the island's disciples, but the teacher said that it was better for everyone to train now and not relax. However, the people did not have time to finish speaking, because at that moment some man, who had asked everyone to move aside, ran as fast as he could, which surprised everyone gathered. The assembled people immediately began shouting at some Jumi, saying that he was behaving in a completely inappropriate manner. Now Coppin's patience had run out too, she scolded the boy, saying how dare he use his abilities in front of the teacher, adding that it seemed like he didn't want to get a higher education. And she immediately added that she would do everything to stop this man. Our hero watched in horror what this woman was doing to the student, who said that he was wrong and asked her to let him go. The boy didn't understand whether everything was okay with the student, because after the teacher dealt with him, other passersby immediately started beating him. And while all this showdown was going on, the registration period ended. The frustrated young man didn't understand what to do in this situation. At that moment, a stranger suddenly approached and asked if he could help with anything. The teacher asked who the young man was, but he only said that his name was Simon F. Gruber, and he asked again if he needed any help. Coppin immediately explained that the teenager wanted to register and immediately laughed. The blonde immediately noted that the guy could spend the night in the dorm, which made our hero very happy. And while Coppin was saying that she would still take care of the registration, Seaman was saying that he had 2 rooms in the dormitory, and therefore his guest would feel quite comfortable. As the men walked forward, Chisei, a new acquaintance, explained to him that there were several theories about psychic energy. No matter how the world changed, only the forces of the elements were eternal. The world was built on the forces of the elements, and they were manipulated by psychic energy. Hearing this, the teenager remembered that the man in the dream had said the same thing, but had not explained that this use of the elements was psychic power. The new acquaintance also explained that the power is also called the power of the gods, because in the past, people were absolutely helpless. Now all spiritual masters have the chance to receive the full power of the legacy. Today, being a spiritual master is much more difficult, or rather, hundreds of times more difficult than in the past. Everyone knows that the best masters of the spirit stand at the top of the pyramid and control the whole world. Hearing this, Chisei again said that nothing was impossible. If he became a spiritual master, he would change everything. Answering a question from a friend about psychic energy, the young man noted that he had good eyesight and added that it was not so easy to come and take a test. Simon explained that there would be a competency assessment exam the next day, and written tests and a final exam the following 2 days. Upon arriving at the dormitory and seeing the living conditions there, the teenager immediately said that the night island was really nice, and that's why he wanted to stay and live there. Grabbing 2 large pillows, the young man shouted that he wanted to keep them for himself. Simon thought to himself that the guy had very bad taste, but out loud he told the young man to rest. They would see each other in the morning. As he walked down the corridor, the young man couldn't understand why his eyes still couldn't grasp the essence of Shisei, who at that moment didn't know whether he would be able to pass the test or not. However, suddenly the teenager felt that something was wrong with him. Having fallen out of bed, our hero saw some strange entity that called him a stupid person. But he could not believe that this was not a dream. As it advanced towards Shisei, the shadow declared that it was always with the young man, although he continued to ask who this unknown person was and why he was pursuing him. The unknown man said that he is our hero, and he is our hero, and someday everything will definitely become clear. The boy tried to understand who gave him his strength, but the man said that Shisei made his own choice. His subconscious asked for help. He absorbed the element of water so that the man could survive. And, throwing a dagger, the unknown person declared that now they would be together. The man declared that from now on our hero could not hold this dagger, but he must keep it a secret, otherwise disaster would come to the young man. Looking ahead, the teenager decided that he had big problems. At this time in Zurich, some girl was talking to someone on the phone. She stated that the National Intelligence Center should be notified and then this person should be found. After that, the brunette declared that she would not allow Shisei to hide from her so easily. The secret surveillance center was shouting that no one could escape detection. They could first try searching in Asia, and then use the internet. One of the employees said that our hero needs to be found before the boss gets angry. Time passed, but the search yielded nothing, especially since the workers wanted to deal with everything as quickly as possible to please the center's founder, Mary. Realizing that nothing was working, the employee reported that he could still look in the Chinese dragon group. Hearing about this, the beauty began to worry, saying that the young man should not fall into the hands of these people, and therefore ordered to find out whether Shisei had been taken to a secret place. Suddenly, the man nervously announced that the object had been found in the Western Pacific Ocean, and, after a short pause, he continued to talk about how the young man was within the boundaries of the night island. Looking ahead, Mary said in a quiet voice that it was very bad if the teenager was there. For a moment, the girl remembered a conversation that happened in 1999, when some stranger said that he was trying to stop the end of the world. But there was one thing he was not going to allow the beauty to do. Returning to the present, the leader noted that it was impossible for Shisei to fall into the hands of that person, and added that she did not care how the young man was returned, but he had to stand in front of her. The officer began searching again, but said the radar couldn't detect the guy, saying that the search could now only be done through a special channel. Suddenly, Mary said that the young man had already joined the dragon group, and therefore decided that it was time to change the plan and stop the search. The employees didn't understand this decision, but the director explained that everything needed to be done quietly, so that the organization wouldn't find out about it. And then she said that the workers had 5 minutes to find all the information about the night island. They needed to contact one person without raising suspicion. Beauty knew that everything should be done as quietly as possible. And with a smile on her face, she added that there was a person who was capable of what they needed, and he was already on this island. After this, the girl began to carefully study some dossier. At this time, some unknown man was looking attentively out the window, outside which a whale was swimming. Realizing that the sea creature had swum away, the man noted with disappointment that he was becoming very bored. At that moment, the island's Minister of Defense entered the room and asked why the young man was upset. He replied that he had seen a bad omen in the night sky, and was therefore sure that their island was in danger, and immediately asked what the minister had in his hands. Realizing that the employee was researching Canadians, the stranger stated that he had nothing better to do than work. But the minister merely said that, according to legend, Paganini sold his soul to the devil in exchange for excellent playing. The man with the mustache declared that it was a legend and immediately switched to the year 1999, noting that there were several candidates then, but none of them visited the city of S. The minister immediately said that the devil from the prophecy 99 years ago went to Night Island before the destruction of the world. The stranger answered mysteriously that anything was possible, but his guess was always accurate, although what they were thinking about was unlikely to happen. Moreover, he himself was still on the island. The minister, closing his eyes, hoped that it was true, and the man lying on the bed noted that it was impossible for the devil to be reborn. Feeling a bit unwell, Kisi hoped that he wasn't sick, especially considering the fact that he had an exam the next day. While performing some manipulations, the guy hoped for a blessing, thanks to which he would still be able to pass this exam. Having concentrated, the guy decided that he would practice again, realizing that it was vitally important for him. After a few minutes, a water element appeared above our hero's palm, which made him happy, but he was upset by the fact that it was tiny and began to shrink. But after just a minute, the young man was glad that he had potential. And so he shouted to himself that he couldn't sleep, that he had to train and train again in order to become the strongest of them all. The next day, all the candidates gathered at the Night Island Training Center to test their strength. Our hero knew that there would be other students here, but he did not expect to see so many of them. The young man felt that spiritual masters were a true rarity, and not a crowd of incomprehensible people. But at that moment, some person pointed out that each of the 500 people was a spiritual master. Approaching our hero, the young man declared that his name was Zhao Yao, but everyone simply called him Do Yao, and that he had come from China, hearing the teenager say his name and city. The young man happily declared that only the elite would be able to pass this exam. At that moment, other guys came up and also decided to introduce themselves. One of them was named Cheeto. He had the ability of Earth. This man's jaw could turn into a hammer drill. Oreo's wind barrier could combine with any surrounding light. The funniest one was Jiaxiao. He said that his ability was to eat everything. Suddenly, Do Yao flipped a coin and shouted for everyone to watch his hands carefully. At some point, it seemed to the audience that nothing unusual was happening, and that the young man simply wanted to attract attention to himself. But suddenly he opened his hand and immediately said that his power is fire. The surface of the body can reach 1,600 degrees Celsius. Even metal can easily melt. Jiaxiao seemed to not believe it, so he pushed the participant's hand and went straight for the coin. One of the men standing nearby said that this should not be done because the metal was very hot. And at that moment, our hero rushed forward, noting that he would extinguish this fire with his ability. Seeing the coin fall to the ground, the teenager wondered if it was true that he had succeeded. Running up to Chi Si, the stranger grabbed him by the shirt, shouting that the boy had decided to play with a water pistol in front of him. A young man standing nearby ordered Ryan to stop the bullying. Seeing him let the boy go, the young man hesitantly asked if a teenager could also use the power of water. Our hero did not like such an indifferent remark, and therefore he asked who these people were, hearing that the guys belonged to an old spiritual family from Europe. At that moment, something strange happened because Ryan suddenly fell to his knees, which surprised everyone. However, a moment later, those gathered looked somewhere ahead. There was a girl in the crowd, and the students were saying that it would be better not to provoke this beauty. The young people said that this participant was really amazing. Suddenly, something else unusual happened, because some creature asked the stranger if she wanted to die. Our hero watched what was happening with horror. It seemed to him that this was all some kind of show, but at that moment the predator rushed at the girl, who said that he had a very strong body. However, the fight did not take place, as some voice ordered the participants in the brawl to stop. The students did not understand who was in front of them, nor why the fighters could not move from their place. And the man continued to say that the teachers didn't tell the students that there was a ban on assault or the use of force in the educational center. These were the examiners who stood on the stage, and therefore all the students fell silent. Nan Gongti, who was the head of finance, said that students who get injured should remember to fill out a compensation form later. Those standing next to our man said that in terms of strength, he was ranked 30th among the best in the world. At the age of 25, this man had surpassed the limit and became a super master of spirits, and such a beautiful one at that. Suddenly, the young man performed some kind of manipulation, but said that this was not an example. The stranger did not like this kind of treatment. He said that it would not end so easily. And a moment later, the girl somehow stripped the enraged man of his clothes. Hearing that everyone should stop doing such things, Nan Gongxi warned everyone gathered that their island was not a place for games. At that moment, Diana told the head of finance that he was a cruel man. Afterwards, the practical instructor stated that this year's candidates were apparently really nice. However, Zhu Guiyu, who was the theory instructor, clearly did not like this statement because he grinned with displeasure. A minute later, teacher Koppen entered the room, which greatly surprised Kisi, who did not expect that she would also be an examiner. But the girl only came to put the teenager's registration form in the pile, because there was no opportunity to do this the day before. But a moment later, Diana asked Miss Koppen why she had come to see them. Suddenly, the teacher shouted that she was the island's security officer, and therefore she was responsible for discipline during the exam. And therefore, she wanted to announce that the 97th selection for admission to the educational institution was beginning. After this, the other examiners explained that the exam would be held in 3 stages, and then it would be clear who would be able to get to the island and who would not. Nan Gongqiu was silent for a moment and then declared that it was now Old Man Lao's turn. The teacher angrily declared that at this stage the children would be assessed on their level of ability, based on their maximum knowledge of the elements. Suddenly, the applicants noticed a glowing ball in the center. The room shook, and no one could understand what had happened. It seemed to the young people that the light was bursting out from this area with maximum force and speed, but after a minute, everyone noticed the strange creatures that symbolized the elements. Despite this, the boys could not pull themselves together, saying that the light was too bright and that they could not see anything. But the young man was interested firstly in why he felt something in his chest, and secondly, in why strange animals or birds were appearing around him. Turning around, the teenager frantically asked the other applicants if they understood what they had to face. However, for some unknown reason, Do-yo was drunk and said that he really wanted to go somewhere there. Suddenly, our hero began to study all the people who stood next to him. He was surprised by the fact that they were enchanted. Realizing that even the strongest participant was moving as if bewitched, the guy decided that something was wrong with everyone here. Grabbing the beauty by the hand, the young man asked her not to leave, but the examiner declared that it was still useless. Diana knew what was going on. She explained that this was a normal action. Something like this happens every year. Suddenly, the students began to come to their senses. They did not understand what had happened to them. Old Man Lao asked everyone to remain silent, explaining that this was natural when the spirit lords were intoxicated by such closeness to the elements, and therefore there was no need to panic. And while our hero was wondering why it had no effect on him, the girl he was holding by the hand sharply told him to let her go. The teacher explained that in front of them was a holographic projection for testing new participants, and then he declared that everyone should immediately enter the barrier. He then added that in the test, the examiner connects the participant's nerves with the elemental totem. This is the determination of the upper limit of the element. This is done to find out whether the participant meets the qualifications or not. So, the qualifications of the funny girl with the wind element were at the C rating mark. Lu Chu had a water element, but his qualification rating did not meet the requirements. However, Zhao Yao had a B rank qualification. The young man was happy. He said that rank B is the best in the audience at the moment. The brunette Ye Xiaoxiao was ranked A, and her element was Earth. But after just a minute, our hero needed to move forward for some reason, and so he asked to be let through. The young man was grabbed and dragged in the other direction, but he was indignant and screaming. Suddenly, Nan Gongse looked closely at our hero. Kisei was also interested in this guy, although he didn't understand what was so unusual about him. And just a moment later, the examiner noted that the candidate had entered the circle, and therefore the test began. The assembled group immediately began whispering among themselves, saying that the guys weren't sure that this person would be able to obtain an A rank. Our hero did not take his eyes off what he saw, because it was new to him. It was Edward Rosmond with the water element, which was ranked A. But after just a few minutes, the guys were saying that the forecast had not come true, because they were facing a very strong candidate. What was most interesting was this about Chisei, who did not understand how one could control water so easily. Those gathered did not understand whether it was true that Rosmond was the heir of the family. The old man said at this moment that the qualification rating was good, but this young man belonged to the devil family. It was strange, but everyone knew that these people had a unique family tradition. For several generations, only the strongest children were chosen as a legacy. The weak generation was killed and sacrificed to protect the system, like the devil. Diana smiled and said that the Night Island has strong children, and therefore the devil cannot be strong here. After some time, all candidates managed to complete their test. Koppen said that Kumamoto Musashi and Simon Gruber received an A rating this year, adding that the guys are really strong. While talking among themselves, the examiners discussed why our hero didn't have an office registration. Moreover, it was unclear what his real powers were. That's why the teachers told Chisei to take the test next, hoping that he would succeed. On the way to the stage, the teenager met Simon, saying that he had also come there. Smiling, the young man said out loud that he was ready. But to himself, he thought that this was just a routine test. The young man quickly entered the circle around which magical elemental creatures were already gathering. The examiners had no intention of delaying. They were saying that it was time to begin. Looking at everything that was happening with fear, our hero tried to understand why there was no response at all from these elements. The participants were surprised, as well as Koppen, who quietly repeated the guy's name. Everyone started shouting that Chi-Si had better go back because he was out of place. Although the young man was confident that he would be able to show something. The people who come to the test are not simple. The guy knew that if he could not stay on this island, he would simply die. Closing his eyes, the young man screamed loudly that he would not die. The guy said that he would become one of the best, becoming a spiritual master. But suddenly something happened that the young man wanted but did not expect. He managed to summon water that appeared above his palm. At that moment, the examiners called out our hero's name, saying that his rating was in the C category. Hearing about this, the guy immediately began to rejoice. He understood that he had managed to pass, which was something incredible. Realizing that the young man looked ridiculous for a while, he immediately began to justify himself, explaining that he initially felt pressure, and then the guys told the teenager not to brag, because the main thing was that he passed. After this, Do-yo said that he wanted to invite the young man to dinner, adding that tomorrow's exam would be much more difficult than this one. Our hero didn't mind, although he understood that his result was far from the best. But there was still a chance, and therefore there was no talk of giving up. Suddenly, Coppin ran up to Chisei, hitting him on the back, and she shouted with joy in her voice so that she would always know that the young man would not be able to disappoint her. Seeing the boy fall to the floor, the teacher noted that she felt a little nervous. Looking ahead, the blue-eyed applicant said that something was wrong here. He didn't believe that a competitor could have a C rating, and then he added that the time would come and he would definitely find out what Chisei was hiding. A minute later, Diana asked why Simon was so serious, and immediately noted that she sincerely felt sorry for this young man. Old man Liao decided to change the subject, and therefore said that it would be better for them all to go and rest, and as for Diana, it would be better for her to take care of the person she herself had chosen. But the teacher said she can't control it. It's Simon. Whatever he wants to do, he will do, and he will never stop. Even if the guy came here because he was invited, she wants to do more than that person expects. But she doesn't know whether the participant will be doomed to die here or not. Hearing Nan Gongqiu say that this was not a joke, the girl noted that her colleague was making her feel bored. After that, he continued to talk about how the person she brought was quite strange. At one point, Ice Hood cried for him, but he only has a C rating. The man continued to think about what had happened, what was wrong, and who this teenager really was. But after a minute, everyone froze in place because they saw a huge flame of fire. He was inflamed by Qin Ming, who had an A+ rating and could therefore be considered the best of the best. Nobody knew what kind of rating this was. Moreover, many had never even heard the name of such a person. And just a minute later, the educational institution employee thoughtfully said that this year there are actually a lot of unusual newcomers. After the first exam was over, all the students were asleep, including our hero, who was still in the same dormitory. However, he didn't get a good night's sleep because Kisi heard an alarm and ran out into the corridor to see everyone running somewhere, not understanding what had happened. While in the corridor, the young man looked at some people in uniform and immediately asked what these guys were going to do. Suddenly, one of the leaders informed the applicants that they should get ready because they were going to the Black Forest to prepare for the second day of the test. The teenager's mouth dropped open in surprise, unable to believe that he would have to do this in the middle of the night. The man repeated what they should do, adding that the exam would start at midnight and that latecomers would be automatically expelled. One of the young men, having rushed ahead, joyfully declared that he would be able to get there first. Seeing the guys undressing as they walked, our hero was surprised why these people were wearing casual clothes under their pajamas. At that moment, our hero was approached by his comrade Do Yao, who asked him to give him a hand, trusting Cha Xiao, who possessed the powers of the wind. Thanks to the fat man, the guys had the opportunity not to run, but still reached their destination quickly enough. Having fallen to the ground, Kisi said in a somewhat confused tone how good it was that they had already arrived. At that moment, the commanders greeted the heroes on the Black Forest platform. Diana, who was the island's instructor, said that they could already begin the test. The girl shouted loudly that the participants had to go through this forest, and she immediately added that applicants would have time until sunrise. The beauty was in no hurry, spoke slowly, and therefore, after another minute, noted that young people can use whatever they want. Only the top 100 survivors will be allowed to take the test. The rest will lose any chance, and it is important to remember that this island will only accept the strong. And then everyone, including our hero, rushed towards the light that opened the way into the forest. Once inside, the young man tried to understand what kind of place this was. Moreover, he was surprised that he did not see the other participants, who just a couple of seconds ago were pushing around next to him. Simon, who was also in the forest, thought that he was lost. Moreover, he was confused by the damp air, reminiscent of the air in London. But the boy had abilities, and so he decided to use the Eye of Horus to penetrate the past and present of all things. And immediately the young man managed to find out that there were 20 exits in this forest. After looking at his watch, the participant decided to figure out for himself which of these options was correct, which would suit him best. At the same time, Chisi was trying to understand why he couldn't find any of his acquaintances. Before the young man had time to grab a stick, deciding that it might be useful to him, some creature appeared in front of him. However, it turned out that it was just a small bug that wanted to scare the young man, who decided that this insect was familiar to him. The teenager said out loud that this is a totem of the earth element. Good luck for the one who rules the earth. But a moment later his thoughts were occupied with something else, because the young man felt something extremely strange. The reason was that the young man felt as if the ground was slipping out from under his feet. Sitting in the observation tower, Diana happily talked about how she liked the newcomers, and the old man added that the examination room was a jungle full of traps. Saying that the instructor was strict with the applicants, the girl said that one must fight harder. When the flowers bloom stained with blood, they look more beautiful, and only the one who understands this riddle will be able to enter into a new life. At this moment, a monster that vaguely resembled a dragon actually appeared in front of Chisei, and so the guy frantically thought that this creature did not at all resemble a holographic projection. The young man felt the beast push him, and so he immediately began to scream for at least someone to come and save him. Sitting by the tree and catching his breath, the young man realized that this was not a game, but this entity almost broke all his bones. The guy wanted to take a break and figure out what to do next, but at that moment the monster headed towards him again. Our hero silently asked himself where the stranger who came to him in a dream, who spoke of what would always be with him, was. Realizing that this predator also had poisonous fangs, the young man began to panic, realizing that he could not do anything. At that moment, someone's arrow pierced this entity, and someone's voice asked why the guy was still here. The young man did not understand who came to his aid, but then he saw the brunette whose hand he had held the day before. And while our hero was pondering the beauty, she asked if he could move his legs, and if so, ordered him to run. The guy wasn't going to wait, as he valued his own life, and so he began to run as fast as he could. Smiling, Kisi thanked his savior, explaining that the creature looked extremely irritated. The girl noted that her mentor said that anger reveals weaknesses, and immediately added that the guy needed to approach and attract attention, and she would do the rest herself. And if at first the young man said that he could not do anything, then a moment later, he was shouting at the snake to come closer to him. The young man remembered that he knew one technique, and so he began to use it. After this, Chisei decided to use a water shield, which he did quite well. Suddenly, the guy shouted at the girl to hurry up. He understood that he wouldn't be able to hold off the predator for long, and the beauty did not wait. She, in turn, decided to use the Earth Spirit technique, which looked very impressive. The beauty used some kind of cross-shaped cut to inflict serious damage on her opponent. Our hero watched in horror as his new acquaintance dealt with this predator alone, and could not believe that she actually succeeded. After some time, the girl was already standing near Chisei, who asked in amazement whether she had really destroyed this beast. However, a moment later the young man became interested in something lying on the ground. Coming closer to the object, the guy began to rejoice at the fact that this was probably a reward for the killed boss. But when the young man took the object in his hand, he immediately pulled it back and screamed loudly that it was very painful for him, not understanding what it was. At this time, another group of people who were hiding in the forest and watching the boys said that now no one could help them. Approaching the beauty, the man demanded that the participant give him the earth element totem, saying that some are born weak and deserve to be losers. Hearing the girl say that this is exactly what she encountered, the ill-wisher ordered that this beauty be seized immediately. The applicant understood what she was capable of, and therefore knew perfectly well that she could take on the challenge, which is what she did. Stopping, the girl asked in a quiet voice who else wanted to come closer to her. The villain stood and looked closely at the blonde. At that moment, some man clenched his fist, which immediately froze. The man shouted that he had a giant boulder technique that the beauty should get acquainted with, adding that she was unlikely to like it. The girl was prepared for this, and therefore immediately ran in the direction where the ill-wisher was. The ill-wisher shouted something about his hand at the same time as another bad person started heading towards Chisei. But the guy managed to take advantage of the trick, and so the enemy ran into a tree, unable to reach his weapon. The guy thought that he needed to act, and so he immediately began to do what was in his power. Standing with a sword, the beauty told her rival that no one would help him now, but she wanted to know how they found her, and immediately added that she would cut off the villain's other hand. The man explained that they had been searching for the earth element magical beasts for a long time, and were going to wait until it swallowed the child, and then they were going to wait until the beast relaxed and fell asleep. Then the girl wanted to know more about the totem, and heard that the only way to get it is to kill a beast of the same element as yourself. Then you need to collect 4 totems of different elements. A moment later, our hero declared that each person would only be able to get 1 totem, so everyone would try to take the totems from each other. The man was angry. He said that only 100 people would be able to stay on the island, but a straggler like our hero would definitely not be able to get out alive. He added that level C is the lowest, and therefore the young man deserves only to rot in this forest and not to receive an education. The young man screamed. He did not understand why such contempt was being expressed towards level S, hearing how they began to insult him again. But after just a minute, our heroes heard some footsteps, after which they saw figures and began asking who else was in the forest. Someone said out loud that it was him, but there was no explanation of what was meant. Suddenly, Edward appeared in the crowd and asked the villain if he had forgotten about the mission for his own benefit. The man begged for mercy. He pleaded to be given another chance. But instead, the blonde coldly declared that he was completely disappointed in his ill-wishers. The young man declared that he would use the element of water, and therefore asked everyone gathered to disperse immediately. After this, everyone witnessed how the villain turned into an ice sculpture. Looking at this, Chisei tried to say something, but he couldn't find the right words. But after a minute, he dared to ask why this was done, and heard that this player's task was to collect totems and remove waste from the level. If this person failed the task, he should be punished for it. The young man was shocked and asked if people were really being killed for the sake of the test, and immediately stated that it was simply illegal. However, Instead of an answer, there was loud laughter that seemed to never end. Suddenly, the young man declared in an indifferent tone that the island only raised strong spirit conquerors, and therefore this stupid theory about justice could be discarded. Only the best will remain, and useless subordinates, including our hero, who was also considered trash, are not worthy of living. The guy said that in the world of spirit lords, one can use power to intimidate and kill simply because of one's own whim. Savior. Chi-Si, standing a little further away from him, lowered her gaze but said nothing. And the teenager asked how this could happen, that he tried to become the same bad person as those who live on this island. But the blonde said in a sarcastic voice that no matter how hard the guy tried, he still remained an ant, and therefore he would never be able to become a spirit master. Hearing this, the young man could not stand it, and rushed at his ill-wisher, calling him scum. It seemed that at that moment nothing could stop the young man, who was full of determination and strength. And so he shouted that if, in order to become a spirit master, he had to be strong, cold-blooded, and cruel, then he did not need such an education. The young man said in a quiet voice that if that was the case, then he shouldn't have come. And then he saw a girl who drew her sword. The brunette's eyes were filled with rage, and it was clear that she wasn't the type of person who liked to joke around when they had a weapon in their hands. The fat man, realizing that something was wrong, immediately began to say that the girl did not dare do such a thing. And while Edward advised Ye Xiaoxiao not to become an ant, she noted that her mentor said that it was not worth staying on the side of bad people, because when lightning strikes, it is very easy to break. Seeing the young men walking away into the distance, the fat man was indignant that they were letting the boys go so easily. But the young master was sure that they would not get out of the forest. And at that moment, the teachers were watching everything that was happening, and they were saying that you don't even want to breathe the same air with this Edward. He's a cold and heartless person. And while some were talking about rules, Nan Gongqi declared that on this island there was only one rule: good and evil. While walking through the forest, our hero asked Ye Xiaoxiao if it was true that she was following him. Peeking out from behind a tree, the brunette asked a counter-question about whether it was true that the young man did not strive to become a spirit master. The young man stated that if this meant causing harm to others, then he didn't really want to be a ruler. Although the girl said that otherwise Edward would find him or he wouldn't be able to leave the forest. After this, Chi-Si noted that he was not going to leave this place. Moreover, he could not be the master of spirits, but he would not allow innocent people to be killed with impunity. The beauty did not understand what the teenager was going to do, but he explained that he had a secret. If he left the island, then he would not be able to live. At the same time, he was not planning anything against his own will. And then he proudly declared that before he finally left here, he would eliminate the shortcomings that existed here. Hearing this, Ye Xiaoxiao said that she wanted to go with the young man even though she would lose her A-level student qualification, adding that she had had a hard time here. After this, the beauty asked the guy's name, but only after hearing his name did the guys notice someone's screams and decided that the sound was coming from somewhere in the forest. At this time, the fat men were laughing at some guy who was crying. They said that they wondered who would come to his aid now. However, the boys did not like this kind of treatment, and so they also began to snap back in order to somehow protect themselves. Suddenly, stones started flying at the villains. Realizing that something was wrong, they demanded that the prankster show himself immediately. Smiling, our hero decided to make a sarcastic remark, after which he introduced himself, seeing how his new friends joyfully pronounced his name. While chasing after the guy, the ill-wishers couldn't even imagine that he was accompanied by an A-rank participant who was proficient in the binding technique. A few minutes later, the villains were already hanging from the branches, complaining and wailing, not understanding why they had been treated so badly. Chi-Si said that he wanted to confront Edward after hearing from a friend that there were many opponents besides this man and that they were all strong, so it was unclear whether they would be able to win. At that moment, Simon's voice was heard behind him, calmly saying that he would also join the guys. The participants were happy to see this guy, but they didn't understand whether they had enough people to resist the ill-wishers. Simon tried to calm the boys down by saying that he had the power of the Eye of Horus, which allowed him to monitor anything, and that he knew a way to stop Edward's cruelty and pass the exam. Ye Xiaoxiao stepped forward a little, wanting to know her colleague's plan, and he said that the most important thing was teamwork. The young man explained that teamwork was based on truth, but Edward broke the truth with a rude and ineffective approach, making the other students feel insecure. According to his assumption, everyone decided that only robbery could remain here, which our hero remembered. But this proposal may look unreliable, but the more people are involved in the robbery, the stronger it will become, and they can reveal the secret and make more people join that gang. Realizing that sooner or later there would be showdowns within the gang itself, the guys rejoiced, saying that, thanks to a cunning plan, they would be able to easily pass the test. Our hero's acquaintances noted that they already have the three elements of wind, earth, and water. The only thing missing is fire. And while the participants were thinking that they absolutely had to find Do Yao, their new comrade opened some kind of magic clock. The guy explained that these were wind spies who would be able to find and track the necessary information, and they would also be able to easily find Yao if he needed it. Understanding that this was no ordinary person, Simon told the guys with a smile not to worry. He was interested in their confidential information. As they walked through the forest, the participants discussed their personal code word, but they were unable to reach a consensus because the proposals weren't the most interesting. Whenever our heroes encountered ill-wishers along the way, they would hang them, as they had done before, realizing that this was the best solution. But alongside the students who stood for good, there were also those who favored evil, represented by Edward, who was planning to carry out a total purge. By 5 in the morning, Chisi said that he was tired, but at the same time noted that Kiruo confirmed the location of the wounded beast, although he did not understand what had happened to it. Smiling, Simon said that everything went well, and therefore told the guys not to worry, because they would definitely be able to do everything they had planned. At that moment, someone shouted very loudly that Shuanghua was coming from this direction. While riding Chashao, our hero asked him to adjust the direction a little and get ready for the jump. A moment later, the young man's friend threw him somewhere, but the young man shouted loudly that the applicant had chosen the wrong direction, and therefore he was now in danger. It was the lair of an unknown creature that lived in the forest, from which the guy ran as fast as he could. Realizing that the time had come to show his abilities, the young man decided to use a water strike. One of the teenager's comrades immediately began asking someone if he was alive. As for our hero, he hunted, realizing that without it he would definitely not be able to become a master. Within a couple of minutes, Chi-se was overjoyed that he had managed to obtain his first water elemental totem, which was a huge achievement considering the complexity of the situation. At dawn, the guy bragged to everyone about what he had done. As for Simon, he understood that our hero's abilities were fluctuating, and quite strongly, but the reason was not the desire to hide them, but the inability to control them. At that moment, the young man delighted everyone gathered by saying that he had managed to find a trace of the fire elemental psionic. Approaching the huge crater, the participants did not understand where it came from, assuming that some kind of rocket could have hit it. But Ye Xiaoxiao noted that there was still a trace of the battle inside. The scene still seemed warm. If she judged correctly, the battle took place about an hour ago. The girl was sure that the stranger saw something below and decided that this something was the element of fire. The unknown person said that this fire had some incredible strength and power. These are the gates to the outside world, and they were forced open. Returning to the present, Simon explained that this crater was created by the power of one person, but it was unclear who it was. But the student did not understand that this stranger had started a heavenly fire, did not fight with anyone, and then disappeared in the fire. Although Chi-se did not understand what happened to the traces of the battle in this place, a girl standing nearby noted that, in other words, besides this man, there were also others who came here and fought. But the young man stated that he heard the voice of Zhao Yao, whom they had been looking for all this time. The boys heard the voice coming from ahead, and so they warned their comrade to be careful, adding that there were traps everywhere. But just a moment later, the applicants found themselves trapped, and were angry because, firstly, the beauty warned them about this so late, and secondly, they did not understand why there were so many traps in this place. However, the attention of everyone gathered was immediately drawn to the tired Do Yao, who stood in front of them. But everything was not so simple, because next to this young man was Edward, who said that they met again. Moreover, he managed to see Simon. Looking at the boys, the villain said with anger in his voice that now it was time to make their choice. And then he added that one can be locked in a dark forest with the ants or submit to him. Everyone must make their own choice. Hearing the beauty say that there was no choice here, Edward said that he was very sorry. He admired Ye Xiaoxiao's abilities, but because of her impulsive behavior, he ran out of patience. The girl was angry about this whole situation, and so she said that her sword would speak best for her. At the same time, our hero heard that his comrade suggested trying to untie the ropes, and at the moment when Edward turned to Simon, he heard someone scream loudly. It was Chi-se, who managed to escape from the trap. The enemy did not expect the situation to turn out this way, although he called the young man a fool. The guy understood that not everything was so simple. Despite this, he was not going to give up, realizing that now he just needed to act. Looking at our hero, Edward was angry, realizing that he did not like the situation that had gotten out of control. The teenager didn't like this man, so he snapped back, declaring that next time he would get more than just a punch in the face. At this moment, the ill-wishers said that now was the time to kill the rivals, although Kisei immediately shouted that there was no need to kill each other because Edward was a swindler. But it seemed that the ill-wishers were not going to listen to this, believing that all this was the most ordinary nonsense. Suddenly, the young man asked his friend, Do Yao, why he was standing silently and not answering. The guy tried to say something, but he couldn't do it, especially since this time some villain shouted at our hero that now his head belonged to him. One of the opponents had already headed towards the direction where the teenager was standing, but he was stopped by Ye Xiaoxiao, who managed to intercept the man. Realizing that the stranger was as close as possible, the beauty thought to herself that his Qi was extremely strong. Pushing her away, the man ran somewhere further, although the girl was not going to give up so easily. At this moment, Edward spoke up, turning to Xianben Wutsang, who said that the man could deal with this beauty. And then the villain explained that this guy is one of the best masters of the earth element, and therefore he will be interested to see if the girl can get out of this fight alive. Our heroine knew this man well. Moreover, she did not believe that he could go over to the side of a murderer like Edward, which she told him directly. As she headed towards the enemy, Ye Xiaoxiao shouted that if he had made his choice, she would not spare him. While attacking, the beauty reflected on the fact that the man's body was hard as stone, so the breath should be concentrated in his stomach. The young man, looking at his rival, said that she had good skills, but Ye Xiaoxiao was upset that the villain had figured out her plan. Answering the girl's question about why Xiaoben Wutsanu made such a choice, he calmly noted that everyone has their own goals, and then a battle began, during which the applicant tried to say that good people would not serve anyone. Realizing that she needed to act, the beauty immediately began to call upon the power of the earth to help her, but was surprised to realize that it wasn't quite working the way she needed. In turn, the man explained that he and Edward always achieve what they want, and he personally gave his friend a chance. Standing to the side and looking at his opponents, Simon realized that Xianben Wukanu was quite a strong opponent, and he already said that his colleague has noble blood and outstanding abilities, but if he is not going to be his partner, then he is a useless person. Simon calmly replied that he was very flattered that he had managed to attract the attention of the heir of the Rose family, not realizing that at that moment one of the opponents grabbed our hero. The man stated that his tongue was much stronger than a steel cable, and therefore the scum did not have long to live. But just a moment later, something indescribable happened, because Kisi found the strength in himself and fought back against his offender. The guy said he didn't expect the surprise attack, but he didn't expect the stream of fire that appeared right in front of him even more. The young man, sitting on the ground, watched as the fire quickly spread through the trees and bushes, not understanding what to expect next, because in front of him stood Do Yao, asking for forgiveness. The young man was angry that his friend had also been recruited by the villains, but he said that he wanted to be alive, he wanted to become a spiritual master, and therefore he had to take steps.